show's gonna be better if I just move out of it. How did the music industry use the term grunge to differentiate this movement from other popular genres of the time, such as glam, or now we call it hair metal, and heavy metal?
Well, I mean, it was all micro-targeting. That was the strategy of the music industry at the time, that you'd go into your Tower Records and there would be 18 different subgenres, and that was basically a function of the material reality, that they were overcharging so much for the literal music product that you were able to have these micro niche communities. Kind of foreshadowed this micro targeting campaigns of the 2000s and beyond. But the difference was that the political economy of the music business was so good for capital, but for the internet, that they were able to do that. So I think it was just a way, and grunge pretty quickly shades into alternative. I mean, I think a good bellwether, and I actually don't know what the year is. What year does MTV give its first alternative award? 90? My guess would be 90. If I had to guess.
That up. I'll look that
up. It would be Alice, because Alice in Chains makes their major label debut, I believe, in 90. And my guess would be that that's when they're getting the push from the music industry to sort of like separate something from metal.
When did 120 minutes? 120 minutes starting up was kind of.
Also, probably my guess is 90 as well. 89, 90. 89, I guess would be a bit early, but basically it's just a way to, marketing.
It actually started in 86. Much to my surprise, I did not know about it in 1986. To be clear,
I wonder if it changed over time. So they start with Husker Du, so they're 91. Doing the underground scene, right?
It says 91 was the first 91, alternative.
So they do it right around when Nevermind is released, and I believe that Motorfinger is released and 10 is released. So 120 minutes, it seems like, from what I'm very quickly looking at here, they did a lot of the Midwest scene. They did Husker Du, New York, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, and also to answer the question, Jason, that you posted, it was just said in the comments before I could say it. It was new. When people are trying to market a thing, you don't want to use a term that already exists. You need to draw a differentiation, draw a line of distinction, right? So grunge was something new. Nobody knew what that word was. Heck, the people that played it sometimes didn't know what the word was. But it was something that allowed everyone to group these bands together that in some cases had no business being together because they weren't part of the same scene or even necessarily the same sound, but it was something new. It was different. Because
I believe it comes from a zine, right, Conan? I believe
I think so,
yeah. From a zine, yeah.
It might have gotten tossed out in Lenny K's Nuggets compilation.
There's a writing on this.
There is. I don't know off the top of my head, but the important thing is that it was a new term, so that it could be, because you don't want youth culture is never, you're never going to be able to sell something on terms that existed from the generation before or even the generation before that. It's always they're going to want some new spin on it. So, but this was one of the last examples of just making something up. They're just like, all right, let's call it this. And then whoever made that decision was probably kind of flippant. It probably wasn't a lot of thought put into it. And then it just became that's what it was. And you're right, it did turn into alternative after that. Because alternative was well, we can make our own grunge bands now. Let's just get these kids. They look good.
You need to fit in the Gin Blossoms. You need to start fitting in all of these right. young bands,
the super pop bands.
Less edge to them, but kept the pop sensibility.
Is Marcy Playground grunge?
I think they're probably post-grunge, but kept the look is the most important thing. Yeah. The look was vital because there became a alternative look, right? Which was sort of the anti-image, because the big anti-image, Jason, I know you stand for glam and the heavy metal days and whatnot, but the whole thing is we're going to go anti-look, which became a look in and of itself, which is you don't want to put too much effort in your appearance. Yeah. Well, that's still a look.
Yes,
says the man in the loud, sparkly blue suit jacket.
I mean, can we admit though that that music was going to kill the pointy guitar, and if any of those guys would have played a pointy guitar, even though they played pointy guitars,
which is funny. You bring up a good point because pointy guitars now they're cheap. So a lot of younger bands are buying these horrific Schecters and these Carvels, and because they're cheap guitars. And if you want to just buy a guitar and start playing music in a band, it's the same thing. Why did everyone use Jaguars and Mustangs? Because nobody wanted
them. They were. I got somebody gave me a Jaguar.
Yeah,
and I got Greg Day to set it up, and I'd used it for the Brazil tour.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, this is awesome. Thanks for giving this to me, because nobody wanted it. But that's also part of this sound, because I think people think that certain amps are higher gain than they are, and they're really not. Marshalls are not that high gain.
No,
the high gain sound that was dominating, that these guys probably wanted, couldn't afford. A
Right.
dual rectifier?
Yeah.
Or Saldana? All these things are, well, I can put a fuzz in front of a Marshall
Meanwhile, I can get this Sun at the thrift store for $100.
for $100.
And that's really what it comes down
That's
to.
loud as shit. Yeah.
So fast forward to Red Fang on, was it David Letterman, right? And like they're sitting there up and looking like gnarled alley cats, like playing this heavy music, like with these like pawn shop amps. But it's years later, and now those things are going for
my God,
$900,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of those distortion pedals, I think, got like gigantic. The Super Fuzz, whatever, like around the time Nevermind came out, they like shot up in price.
Find them at pawn shops
reading
to
about
find them at vintage shops, basically, and like. And that led to the whole culture. Well, like I was on our mutual friend's 1001 album complaints talking about a Mudhoney record, and like they do those mean link tweets, and I said they single handedly raised the price of vintage fuzz pedals for an entire generation. Was mine. Because it's true, man.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
It's hell
Yeah, of
true.
course.
I told Turner that and he cracked up. He thought that was hilarious.
You could even get like Les Pauls were somewhat affordable at that time because nobody was playing them.
Nobody wanted them, like because it's all because if you're coming at it from the world of DIY, from the world of punk rock, not as a genre but as an ethos, what you're gonna want to do is get the cheapest things possible to just get going and do it.
Yes.
You don't want to sit there and like, oh well, okay, we can get so that because that's some real like Tuesday night blues band mentality of like, well, I'm gonna get this $2,000 head to go with my $3,000 guitar, this and that. By the way, I have all those things, but I've also been playing music for like 25 years, actively touring and making records. So F off.
Some of those things might be worth that much now.
I'm a professional.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like there's a different thing when you're like a punk rock kid that's or. Whatever. I should not use the word punk rock because people associate that with the genre of punk rock. I'm talking about the spirit of DIY, which most of these bands are coming from. Like, let's make the kind of music that we're not hearing. We like Black Sabbath, and we also like Flipper, and let's make a band. We like, the Sonics. We like all of these bands that like people have like at the time. It's hard to think about. They were lost to time. Some of these bands, especially like record store nerds knew what Nuggets were. No one else knew.
But isn't that what this music does do, though? That hardcore scene of the 80s, I don't know if you agree with this, Danny, Black Flag, especially the SoCal scene, right? Even up to the Bay, Flipper, Dead Kennedys. That's what a lot of this music sounds like to me. If I put that new name on it, I can sell punk now. And these guys don't look like what punks look like in the 80s. There's no spikes. It's because that's
there's two differences. I think that they have solos in a way that a lot of those some of them did. I mean, but it wasn't associated. And they're kind of a melding of when early hardcore and when hardcore slowed down around the mid 1980s with like the Butthole Surfers and the Melvins, when they kind of all begin to move past the hardcore, the super fast, minute and a half hardcore to this sort of sludgy sounds. I think grunge emerges from that. And then just classic 70s pop songwriting, at least in the big grunge bands, even with Soundgarden, which is I would say the most musically complex. There's an element of sort of anthemic chorus, obviously. Yes. Even though they do use weird time signatures. Doesn't Spoon Man have like a weird time signature? It's like 13/8 or something. And it's like, how the hell was that a hit? But even within that, I think that's basically where grunge is. Punk ethos plus some like punk stuff. If you think of Do the Evolution or Territorial Pissings, like they kind of sound like slightly slowed down. Hardcore with the sort of sludgy. If you think of a Nirvana song like Big Long Now, which is a very Melvin song, and then mixed with Melvin's like song, mixed with really good pop songwriting, I think is what creates grunge.
Do you think that, because for me, I do think they are influenced by some 70s rock. You can definitely hear it, or album-oriented rock, right? Because they're probably listening to it as they're growing up.
Kiss loom large.
Kiss, Zeppelin, Aerosmith are the big three that people.
It is that though. Black Flags. The end of Black Flag, those last 3 records where they really slow it down.
Instead of like we're going faster and faster, it's like no, we're gonna go slower.
It's when Black Flag slows it down and gets to go to Seattle. Yeah, it's like Seattle got what the world didn't get, or the country didn't get with Black Flag, because there was such a pushback on that band when they do slow it down to the point where they were kind of antagonistic to the fans.
And Seattle's also weird because they were isolated, so there was like there's more fluidity there than in a scene like New York or LA. at the time. I think that the isolation allows them to combine influences in a way that maybe people in other scenes didn't feel as comfortable doing.
That's a
As
great
well, I
point.
think that's important.
Well, you mentioned
That's
the
great.
Wipers too. The Wipers, a Portland institution, massively influential, but also just could not catch a break, man. That's a band that couldn't get arrested. There's every record, Greg Sage was screwed over by every record label. So because of this, it was something where the Wipers were one of those. They're like a record store band. It used to be like, we called it, as someone who used to work at a record store, there'd be bands that like you would talk to people at the record store. Oh yeah, you should check out the Wipers. You'd really dig it. But until Nirvana championed them, and I covered actually a couple of their songs.
2 songs, Return of the Rat and D7, they're both Vipers songs, yeah.
And people didn't know. And people didn't know because, again, they were just a band that had a rough go of it professionally, like from perspective of dealing with record labels and getting music out in the world, but massively influential. I mean, to the point, like, look, you don't have a Hot Snakes without Wipers. Like there's no way. Like John Reese would be the first one to admit that. It's like Crime plus Wipers.
Yeah.
Great. I'm in.
Let me.